Yeah. So without further ado, we have Beth Guckenberger and Kim Botto on with us today. And just want to really quick give you a little insight into who they are, which I'm sure they'll share a little bit more, but we are so excited for you. Hi, you guys. And so Beth and her husband Todd live with their family in Cincinnati, where they serve as co-executive directors of Back to Back Ministries. She went to Indiana University, degrees in education, and then the Guckenbergers actually moved to Monterrey, Mexico. And so they founded the international arm of Back to Back Ministries in 1997. They have hosted thousands of guests on their ministry campus. They've got raised 10 different children, which is a miracle, I think, in and of itself. So Beth is also an author and just a dear, dear friend of Incm. So Beth, thank you for being here. And then we also have Kim. It's a double whammy webinar. I love this. Kim has led kids ministry in churches of 100 to churches with thousands of kids every weekend. She currently leads the kids and student teams and the adoption ministry at Crossroads Church, which has sites in Ohio and in Kentucky. Kim's passion is helping others build teams who create fun, safe, and welcoming environments for all kids, especially the challenging ones. There's a special place in heaven for you, and to experience God and grow in their faith. So we have two amazing, amazing leaders with us today. And without any more talking from us, we want to spend the rest of the time learning from you guys. So take it away.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for just setting us up in that way and explaining who we are a little bit. That's really how we wanted to start. I'll just give you an overview of what this hour will look like. You're going to hear us talk later today that understanding what the transitions are and understanding what you can expect to happen is a really beautiful way that we help kids from hurt places feel a sense of security and safety and orientation. So I'm going to start by modeling that to you. I'm going to share about 15 minutes of some science, some of the reasons and ways in which trauma impacts the brain and why behavior then manifests itself as a result of that, of those biochemistry changes. Kim's going to talk. She's a fantastic children's minister in a really large church and has put to practice these trauma competent principles inside of her ministry. She'll give you lots of practical application on how it's looked in her church. Then we're going to give you some ideas of some next steps or first steps if you haven't incorporated any of this understanding into your ministry on a regular basis. And then we'll balance out the end of our hour with some Q&A. So we want to start by just saying, if you have any questions or answers, any questions you're looking for answers, you can begin at any point in our presentation to put those up in the chat box. They'll be monitoring those. Megan and Michaela will. So you don't have to wait till the end of our time. If one of us says something in the science, or Kim shares in a practical way in which she's using it in her classroom, and you're like, I don't understand what they mean by this, or I want to challenge this, or help me understand this, go ahead and give us that feedback in real time, and we'll be getting together as many of those questions as we can at the end. I also just wanted to say, she just said, I worked in orphan care, I still do, have for a really long time. So I had a lot of experience with kids from trauma, but to be honest, I spent a long time with a pretty limited tool belt. I had a degree in education and I loved kids. I had tons of passion, but I didn't really understand what was going on with traumatized kids. And I thought trauma just meant somebody who had been through maybe abuse, somebody who had been in a car accident, somebody who had been through a natural disaster. I didn't really understand all the ongoing ways in which neglect and abuse impacts a child. So I'm sure that everyone listening has, to some degree, levels of experience. Some of you, decades of experience with kids from trauma places. Some of you are just walking into environments where you are just meeting kids for the first time who are from hurt backgrounds. But wherever you are in that spectrum, our desire for you today is just to give you some more tools for your tool belt. So just some more hands-on things that you can do in a very, very realistic, practical, and intentional way. I often quote my friend, Dr. Susan Hillis. She works for the Center for Disease Control. They have put out a study last year that says of the 2 billion children on the planet, 50% of them, or 1 billion children, have been impacted by trauma in some way, over 35 million in the US alone. So trauma is not this small percentage of your kids' population. This is an ongoing issue, an ongoing problem that we got to figure out so that families feel welcome in God's house.
Welcome, Beth. I'm Kim, and I have, as they said, I've worked in children's ministry for a number of years, churches with a couple hundred to tens of thousands. And about 6 years ago at Crossroads, we really felt like we were called to welcome kids who had challenging behaviors and maybe didn't fit in other places. And God started fulfilling that vision, and we're like, oh my gosh, we do not know what to do with this behavior. So we started training ourselves on what to do with kids from trauma. And it has made a huge difference in our ministry. It's changed the DNA. And also, it's changed me as a mom. I have 5 kids. 2 of my kids were adopted, so they have some trauma in their background, and it has completely changed the way we parented. So these things that we're going to talk about today aren't just helpful in your church. They're going to be helpful in your home, and they'll be helpful in your relationships too.
Okay, well, let's get started. I want to start by helping you understand what the 6 risk factors are for the development of emotional and behavioral problems. So you'll see some slides going up that will give you opportunity to write notes, but you'll also have access to these afterwards. But it could be something as simple as a difficult pregnancy. Not all children from trauma come from environments where somebody has actually abused them in a way maybe that you imagine. Maybe they had a difficult birth, separation or hospitalization at birth that kept them away from that nurturing parental figure. Maybe they did have some kind of acute trauma, abuse, or ongoing neglect. But I say all those factors so that we can sometimes be guilty of a little reverse engineering. We see a child that has behavioral problems, and then we make some assumptions about their home life or about the adults that are in their life. But there can be all kinds of factors that come into play for a child to struggle in that area of abuse. So I just know right off the bat, hard happens in all kinds of ways. There's 3 kinds of trauma, and we're going to today put them really in 2 buckets. One is acute trauma. That's just that one-time incident that maybe a child was in a car accident, or they had a parent divorce, or just a one-time event that they're continuing to process and that has changed possibly their biology, their belief system, and certainly the way that they're behaving in your classroom. The next 2, that chronic trauma or complex developmental trauma, that's that ongoing, depending on when it started in their life. And if the differences between the different kinds of trauma is interesting to you, at the very end, we're going to give you a resource page with lots of places that you can go for further information. What we're going to just make the assumption in today is, regardless if somebody has acute trauma, chronic trauma, or complex developmental trauma, they've entered in your classroom and they're struggling, and you can feel that. So of that complex developmental trauma, what I want you to hear is that it starts real early. It's chronic. It has to do with a mis or maltreatment of a child, and it involves the absence of a safe adult. And that 4th point, that absence of a safe adult, is really where you begin to be a part of partnering with God in the healing of that child. As you begin to place safe adults into the life of the children, we want those safe adults to be as equipped and as prepared for the kinds of challenges that they're going to have. So that's a really important part of that kind of trauma. I want you to hear that chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress ends up impacting body. So you might see a child that's underdeveloped in some way. It certainly impacts the brain, the balance of our time together. We'll talk about the impact directly to the brain. Their biology, if you're interested in epigenetics and all the ways in which a parent's trauma impacts a child and can impact the next generation if left without intervention. It definitely impacts their belief, how they see the world, what they believe about the world. So we might be trying to talk to them about, you need to trust Jesus. You need to believe Jesus in your life. And they don't trust anyone. Why would they trust Jesus? They certainly don't even trust you. And then lastly, what probably caused over 2,000 of you to log on today is you see the way that trauma impacts behavior. And, we see the tragedy happen over and over again. Some child is acting out in a classroom, and a teacher or volunteer doesn't feel like they have the understanding or the know-how or the margin or the training to know what to do with that child who may be having some kind of dysregulated outburst. And so we put the number on the screen. We call the parent out of Big People's Church. They feel the shame of feeling like, you can't take care of my kid any more than I can. I'm not coming here anymore. This is hard. And then suddenly that family, to the very place they need to go for encouragement, community, connection, love, attention, prayer, all the opportunities they can receive from ministry inside of your church is disrupted because because they don't know, we don't know, nobody knows how to deal with a child that's been impacted by trauma. So I want you to see on this next slide that trauma in particular, it does a couple different things. It alters brain chemistry, it damages the nervous system, and so the first way that you might see it in your classroom is the way that it impacts the sensory processing development. So sometimes we think about the brain as a cup. And inside that, some of our kids have really small cups, which doesn't have anything to do with their intellectual ability, but I'm talking about the way that in which they process their environment, stimulus, and information as it comes to them. And some kids that you have really small cups. And so any stimulus, any information, any two-step direction, all of it feels very overwhelming. And you can see them begin to act out when they feel like their cup is overflowing or there's more coming at them. These are kids that don't like loud music or strobing lights or large groups or complex instructions. And they might act out in response to the fact that their cup is being overflowed. And some kids have these enormous cups that no matter how much you put into them, it never feels like they're full. They're what we call sensory seeking. These are kids that are rubbing up against you, that are pressing against things, that might be licking or eating things that are not edible. They're constantly seeking input in a sensory way from the environment around them. And that trauma ultimately begins to damage the body's ability to manage stress and all the chemicals that course through our brains as we try to manage stress levels and learn how to regulate ourselves. And I just want to say the basic sentence that traumatized children and adolescents display changes in the level of stress hormones similar to those that we see in combat veterans. So really, the impact of trauma on the brain of a child is much like PTSD. It's just in this pediatric or infantile. So you have stage. So you have these kids who have these PTSD precious brains coming into your classroom. And there's some simple things you can do that can immediately make them feel calm and relaxed and safe. And like the environment they're in doesn't need them to kind of fight, flight, or freeze. So take a look at these pictures. These are 3 pictures of a child's brain. So certainly where we would like all kids to be in our classrooms is in a calm state. That's where they can be meeting new people, receiving information, engaging in a lesson, participating, volunteering, synthesizing content. That would be a beautiful place for all the kids in your classroom to be. But many kids who experience trauma are down there in that bottom, in that fear brain. So your brain has a frontal cortex, this front part of your brain. That's where we problem solve and have cause and effect and understand right from wrong. And that's where all the best and most critical thinking happens, is right here at the top of your brain. The back of your brain, these little almond-shaped glands behind your ears, those are called your amygdala, and that's where fear lives. And the most important thing for you to know in this slide is that your amygdala and your frontal cortex can't activate at the same time. And your amygdala is going to win every single time. That's what we call your fear brain. And when you begin to get into that alert stage, that intermediate stage between calm and fear, your brain is so smart, it begins to shut down, conserve energy. It stops working in the front of your brain where all those really important functions are. And it begins to conserve energy to just keep you alive because you are feeling threatened in some way, or your child's feeling threatened in some way. And when a child is in its fear brain is when you begin to see all the behaviors that are difficult to manage as an adult in a classroom. And so as you get to know your children, you'll understand, and you might be able to already be thinking right now of kids that you see kind of move from that calm to alert stage. When you get them in that alert stage, that in-between stage, here's a couple things that you can do to try to remedy or turn the tide before they go all the way into their fear brains. You might be able to simplify instructions. Maybe too much is coming at them at one time and they feel like they can't accomplish everything that you're expecting of them. Lower your expectations of them. Just give them a different set of instructions or restructure what you're asking of the whole classroom in a way that feels like manageable bite-sized pieces. Tell yourself to count to 10 silently. Maybe you're asking them to respond to do something, to pick something up you ask them to pick up, or to answer a question, they're not processing information fast enough because they've begun to move away from that frontal cortex back there into their fear brain. Even asking yourself to count to 10 silently gives them a little bit of margin to come up with the right answer, so that you don't get triggered yourself as a child doesn't do what it is that you're asking them to do. And then begin to celebrate when you see them make the effort, give and receive love, reach back out to you. When you see a child engage with you, then you have the opportunity to step on those little baby steps and walk them back into a calm state. But if you get a child that either it happened so fast, or you had lots of other people that were paying attention to, or they walked into your classroom already in the fear state, take a look at that next slide. You can see in their fear brain, here are some of the things that you might see. You might see what we would consider traditionally as bad behavior. You might see them go into some protective strategies. That's like triangulation or manipulation. You might throw some fits. They might yell really loud. They might run away. Whatever they need to do, because they're back there in that fear brain, they're thinking, I have got to protect myself. They might suppress their conscience. You're thinking, I can't, like, how in the world why would they hit that other child? Or why would they self-sabotage? Or they're not able in that moment to discern what their needs are. So when you interact with the child in their fear brain, you can kneel down and look at them right in the eye, get right at that eye level, help them understand in a calm, soft voice what's going to happen next, just orienting them to, this is what's happening here and this is what's happening next. And I know that you love a snack, and so we're going to have a snack later, but if you'd like to have a snack now, I'm going to put this aside for you, and engage them in play. There's some beautiful research that talks about what happens in our brain when play begins to happen, that it literally creates synapses that get our brain back up functioning in that frontal cortex, which allows all those important cause and effect and problem solving skills to be employed. So when I encounter a child who is activating in their fear brain, if I can begin to play with them and incorporate humor and lower myself down physically to their level and talk in a soft voice, you have the best chances of beginning to turn the tide and return that child back into the place that they are. So, yes, so many things to keep talking about. When you see a child in that fear brain, a couple of the things that you can do is just tell that child that if they've done something and now they're in what you might consider an out of control state, or what we might call a dysregulated state, in that soft voice and that playful tone, in those simple instructions, tell them that you want to give them a chance to use their voice. The most important thing we can do for a child is give them an opportunity to use their voice. So Kim's going to tell you some of the ways in which she's invited kids to use their voice in her ministry.
Yeah, and first of all, this slide's good. And first of all, the science is important as we work with kids and with teams who work with kids. So often we think that just telling a kid to stop is enough, and it's simply not. So we need to build empathy with our teams, that these children, their brains are different. And we all want to be like Jesus, right, Beth?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Jesus says, let the little children come to me. Don't turn them away, because the kingdom of heaven belongs to people like this. Jesus did not qualify it. He didn't say, let the little compliant children come to me. Let the ones who will sit quietly on my lap. And actually, I think the image we give of Jesus with children, I'm not sure that the pictures that we create right now are accurate, because I believe that there was probably a kid sitting on his lap that was maybe scooting another one off so they could get closer to Jesus. I think there was probably some kids that were sitting out front playing in the dirt and throwing rocks. And so if we want to be like Jesus, we have to train our teams. We have to change the way we respond to challenging behavior so that every kid feels welcome. So there are some things that we can't see. And one is the slide that you see right now, the images of the brains of two different 3-year-olds. The image you see on the left side is a child who was brought up in a healthy environment. When that child cried, somebody picked him up. When that child was hungry, someone fed him. They felt safe. The child's brain on the right is a child who grew up in an orphanage in Eastern Europe. They cried and nobody came to them. They were hungry and nobody fed them. And it actually altered the way that you can see in the scan. It changed the way the brain looks. So it changed the way the brain functions. So that's what we can see. Now, this next slide helps illustrate what we can't see, and or what we actually can see. Dr. Karen Purvis, who worked a ton with kids from trauma and really influenced the way that we respond to children, she said, behavior is the language of children who have lost their voice. So we can't actually see that their brain is different, but instead what we see is we see behavior, because these children have lost their ability to express to us verbally what's going on, and they're communicating to us in the only way that they know how. So the good news is, well, the bad news is that trauma alters the brain. The good news is that the way God designed our bodies, the brain can actually heal. And some of those pathways that didn't get built or are distorted can actually heal. And the way that happens is through experiences, and relationship is the most important thing in a kid recovering from trauma. There's all kinds of different things you can do. How long have we heard, oh, kids are resilient. All they need is a little love. Kids do need love, but they actually need more than love to recover from trauma. So the next thing we're going to look at is a child's belief system, because we actually have the opportunity to change what a child thinks about themselves. The belief system is so important because let's look at the belief. If you look at the slide up here, the belief system is formed by the words that we hear and by our experiences. Our belief system then impacts our emotions, which then impacts our behavior. So if we believe one thing, it's going to change the way we feel, and it's going to change the way that we behave. For example, in Kids Club, this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was sitting on the floor with a bunch of 4th grade boys. It was in a small group, and we were talking about who Jesus created us to be, and they were identifying things that they were good at. And this one little boy that was sitting right next to me, he said, I'm a bully, and I smell bad. So the kids around the room were asked, so why do you think you're a bully? And he says, my dad tells me I'm a bully. My teacher tells me I'm a bully. My school principal, who I spend a lot of time with, tells me I'm a bully. So the kid sitting next to him kind of leaned over and he went, you do smell funny, but you're a good friend to me. And so the other boys in the circle started affirming him. And so we talked to the leaders in the room, told them that this child thought he was a bully. So they started calling out positive things that they saw in him. He was an artist. They also talked to his parents and worked with him. And over the course of, it took a couple years because our belief systems aren't changed overnight. But this kid started believing differently about himself. He started looking at himself as, I'm a friend. I'm an artist. Now, whenever the leader in his kids club room would ask for somebody to draw something or illustrate something, he always raised his hand because he was no longer the bully, he was the artist. So we, through our words and our experiences that we offer to kids, we can actually change what they believe about themselves, which then in turn will change their behavior. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And in kids ministry, we get an hour, maybe 2 or 3 hours with a kid a week. This is going to take time of just depositing new words into them, new truths about who they are. Now, we want to talk about I'm going to give you 6 practical examples that you can do this weekend. You can do it tonight with your own kids on ways that we can increase the connection with kids and also how we can help them feel safe. Because kids who've experienced trauma, feeling they have to be in an environment where they feel safe in order to heal. So the first one is, we say this a ton in Kids Club, connect before you correct. And what that means is, when you have a kid who misbehaves, rather than immediately going to the, what did you do? We want to connect with them. An example of this was last Easter, I was called to a preschool room. There was a 5-year-old who was not being compliant. Actually, he was being combative. He was very hard. So when I arrived in the room, he was sitting in the hall. And so I sat down and I was trying to, talk to him. Hey, how you doing? He was having none of it. And so finally he said to me, wait, I want to make sure I don't say these words. He called me a mother FB, but he said it full out and told me to shut up. So this is another tip. Watch what your face is communicating. So I had to take a deep breath.
Count to 10 silently.
Count to 10 silently. And then speak to him, because the importance of our face is kids who've been through trauma can say things to us that are shocking, but our face either communicates, I'm a safe place, you can continue talking to me, or just with our response, like they'll shut down. So I took a deep breath. I then turned to him and I said, you really hurt my feelings when you said that. Is there a way that you can say it to me nicely? And so he sat there for a little bit and he kind of looked around and then he said, will you stop talking, please? And we were then able to go on and have a conversation. And in the midst of that conversation, I found that his father had been murdered about a year ago. And this kid, his mad was actually sad. He was a hurt, traumatized child. And in that case, if we had gone straight to discipline, we would have missed the opportunity to have a relationship with him. The third strategy that you can try is the power of yes. How many times, if we're in a conversation and somebody says to us no, that immediately stops the conversation. I mean, there's nothing more to talk about. They told us no. And by using the power of yes, we are continuing to have opportunities to talk to the child and engage with the child. So an example would be in children's ministry, goldfish are a big hit. So kids will come in, they'll say, I want my goldfish now. Well, we could say, no, not now. Another way to say that, and you're conveying the same thing, but it's in a positive manner, you can say, you can have your goldfish. We're going to do it after large group, and I'm going to take your cup and put your name on it and put right up here, and you can have it later. And there's all kinds of ways. I have found once I started thinking about the power of yes, I realized how often during the day I'm saying no to my kids and my grandkids and the kids that I work with. So that's just a strategy. Next time you hear yourself saying no, think of a way that you can change it and actually respond in a positive manner. Another way would be if they say, I want my mom now. You can point to rather than say your mom isn't here, you can point to the clock and say, see this hand on the clock that's on the 6? Well, it's up here to the 12. Your mom's going to come back. So we talked about connect before you correct, watch your face, and the power of yes. Another strategy, and Beth talked about it up at the top, transition and predictability. One thing that makes a kid feel safe is that they know what's coming next. And actually, all kids want to know what's coming next. I want to know what's coming next. And as we're trying to establish children's ministries that are welcoming to all kids, brand new kids who have no trauma in their life, they want to know what's coming next. So we can do that through, like Beth did at the beginning, telling you what's coming. Or in children's ministry, when a kid comes in the room, we say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this for a while, then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. And another thing, I think in the effort to be expedient, we will often, yell to a room, 5 minutes to a large group, which sometimes makes me a little anxious, the yelling. So a way that we can tell kids about transitions is actually go to each group and say, hey, Beth, we're in 5 minutes, we're going to move on to something else. Hey, Jared, get your, I don't want to be sexist, so get your baby dolls put up, Jared, because we're going to be going to small group in a little bit.
And it builds trust when in 5 minutes, then you do make that
That's right.
transition. They think, oh, what she says she means.
That's right.
What happens next, I can believe, is going to happen.
Which then makes us safe. Then we're safe people. Another strategy is to give kids choices rather than to tell them, you have to do this. Give them an option. For example, in our kids' rooms, a lot of our kids' rooms, we have stages, and stages are so attractive to kids. They want to be on them with whoever's up there. So we had two kids who were twins. Twins come in twos. They were sitting in large group, and every week they wanted to get on stage. And we did this training with some of our volunteers. We talked about giving choices to kids. And so the volunteer then told the kids the next week, hey, you can sit up here by the stage. You can either put your hands on the stage during large group, or you can sit back here and you put your feet against the stage. What do you want to do? And each little girl chose something different, but for the whole large group, that's how they sat, and they never got on the stage.
It shares power, and I think it adds to that child feeling like they have a voice. So helping them, if you don't care if you sing first or do your craft first,
What a choose.
Yeah, sharing that power of how our time spent together is unfolds. It gives value to a child.
Right. And I think for some of us as adults, we crave control, and sometimes we'll feel like, well, if I'm giving them a choice, well, then I'm no longer in control. Well, actually you are, because you're only giving choices that you're good with. And it's really not about us being in control. We are not trying to get kids to comply in the moment. That is not our goal. What we want long-term character transformation in a kid, and helping them by giving them a choice, which is actually helping them learn how to make decisions, is really helpful. So, and then the sixth practical strategy that you can use is redos. I need redos as an adult.
Yes.
So Beth and I were talking. Well, I don't want to tell secrets,
Yes,
but she uses redos with special adults in her life. But the way redo works is, let's say a kid in your ministry or in your home does something that's not in the acceptable way. For example, you're moving from small group to large group, and how many of them just want to run and plow over some of the slower kids? Rather than yell at them and tell them to stop, or what you can do is you can take them and say, hey, when we move from small group to large group, or from large group to small group, we walk. So let's do it again. And you can take them back to where they were. You can have them sit down and remind them, now what we're going to do is we're going to walk to the table. And they walk to the table. What you're doing is you're training them how to do it correctly. Anything that I've ever done, typically the first couple or first 100 times I do it, I'm not that great. But it gives them practice. And then when they leave your classroom that day, they've left having walked from large group to small group the way you wanted them to.
And you can affirm them in that, and how positive it is for them to get those good words from you. As you say, I loved how you walked.
Positive encouragement is the best way to change behavior. And affirming one child for their positive behavior actually changes the behavior of the whole room. So we just talked about doing it with an individual. You can also do it with a group of kids. There are Sundays I walk into a room and I really pray, dear Lord Jesus, show me something I can affirm in here, because sometimes there just isn't much. It's amazing, by just affirming one child, how other kids then, they want attention too, and they will change their behavior. So anyway, so redos, that's the last strategy that we're going to share today. But that's a great way to train kids in the right way to do it.
Yeah, and I was Kim and I were talking earlier about the idea that sometimes kids look angry, and anger can look all different kinds of ways depending on their age and their temperament. But that anger is a secondary emotion, and the primary emotion with which anger sits on is fear. So every time a child displays anger, like I hate this, or I don't like this, or that little boy that was out in the hallway with her, every time a child displays anger, they're really showing their hand to you on what it is that causes them to be afraid. And that's why we're all in kids ministry anyway, is to have the opportunity to have meaningful conversations with kids about the things that make them afraid. and the Jesus that we believe that wants to meet them in those fears. And so again, another practical strategy is sometimes when we're dealing with classroom management, we might do some kind of timeout where we say, you who disrupted my story hour, you who colored on someone else's paper, you who ate their snacks, you who did whatever is not okay, I'm going to separate you from everybody else because now you are so bad you cannot any longer be influenced to anyone else. And we cut them off. When the truth of the matter is, in that moment, that whatever's causing that behavior that was unacceptable, they're trying to say something, and separating them from everybody isn't going to give us an opportunity to hear what it is that they want to say. So I couldn't encourage you enough to have enough volunteers, enough margin in the way that you structure your classrooms that you can time somebody in with that child. Maybe you still need to remove them from everyone else, but they don't go off in an isolated state. They go off with someone who can really share some goldfish, ask a meaningful question, sometimes even sit in silence, but give that message to that child that what's going on inside of you is important enough to me, and I'm going to sit here and be present with you in it.
Yeah, and also as far as volunteers, I know it's hard to do training with them. People's schedules are tough. What we have found though is just giving it in little bites. Like just tell everybody a story about how a redo worked and give them a couple ways to do that. And what you're doing is you're equipping your volunteers. And up front, it's going to take more time. I mean, it takes time to train, but by equipping them, they are going to feel, they're going to have more tools. Like Beth talked about her toolbox. They might be coming in the room and they've only got a hammer, and they may need a lot more tools today. And so what you're doing is you're giving them more tools in their toolbox, which is going to it's going to empower them. They're going to enjoy their time serving more, and the retention level is going to be higher. And which is great because, as Beth said earlier, relationship is so important to the healing of the brain. So if volunteers feel trained and equipped to deal with challenging behavior, they're more likely to stick, which then these kids are going to have longer term relationships with their leaders.
Oh, absolutely. And just even again, to her point, this kind of information is actually good for me in my everyday life. When I realize that anger sits on top of fear, then when I get upset with my husband or with any of my children in my family that aren't from a trauma background, I have to ask myself, what am I afraid of that's creating this negative emotion inside of me? And how can I address that fear rather than just demonstrate this negative anger, which might evoke somebody else's anger? And then we now have a situation that could have been avoided if I had just been honest about what my fear is. If we can train ourselves to ask that question, then we're all going to just get in a path of healing, and the Lord can meet us in that place. So this next section is just some next steps or first steps, depending on where you are. Megan and Michaela might jump back on at some point and give us some of the questions that you've been giving in your chat box. But let me give you a little bit of some ideas of some first or next steps. I want to encourage you to equip your volunteers to look for things that they can celebrate, things that they can say to large groups and to individual kids, and certainly to parents that are successes. So many parents who are parenting kids from hurt places come to your classroom to drop off your kid, and they're expecting to hear a negative report because that's what they hear at the bus driver, that's what they hear from the classroom, that's what they hear from the neighbor's parent, and they're expecting. So when you can say, hey, I saw today that your child, even if it's something small, you're going to deposit a positive wording experience into the life of those parents, and they're going to associate that positive feeling with God's house, with God's church. And they so often feel rejected and misunderstood and feel like their children's behavior is a reflection of their ability. So they feel embarrassed when their children don't behave in ways that are within a zone of acceptability. So man, celebrate the successes of the kids as often as possible. Try to think of something good to say to every parent when they come to pick up their child.
Yeah, we actually have signs by a lot of our doors as the kids are exiting where it says, tell the adult who picks up the kid one good thing about them. And it's not that hard to find one good thing about a child, even if they're energetic. I mean, you say, man, they were so excited to be here. They love being here. And you will find, as Beth said, parents who have kids who are, if they have challenging behavior in the kids ministry, They're having it everywhere. And if we can set that kid up to succeed in children's ministry, we are going to have more opportunities to tell that kid about Jesus, because the parent will continue to bring them back.
Yes. Think about the adults that you put into the life of the kids that enter into your ministry. And I know some of you have logistical changes. So just think of this more as a guiding principle than as a rule. But the least amount of change in terms of adult-child relationship, the better. The more consistency a child has with adults, the better it is. It would be beautiful if their first grade teacher became their second grade teacher, and their second grade teacher became eventually their fourth grade teacher, so that safe adult can pick up every time where they left off last time and continue to build the opportunity to strengthen relationship, they have increased credibility, they know where that alert brain is starting to go into the fear brain, and they can stop some of those triggers or be aware of things that could be a trigger for a child. But just as much as possible, keep the same adults in the lives of the children that you serve.
Now, Michaela and Megan, did you guys have any questions that you wanted to?
There are a couple that come up. The first I was hearing an echo. Sarah mentioned that she has at sometimes 8 kids in a group of 45 that she needs to get to sit down. And so she's wondering, how do I give choices to 8 kids at the same time? To when I have 45 other kids as well in the room that I'm trying to manage. So I think just in some practical situations where there's a little bit of overwhelm and maybe multiple behavioral issues arising at the same time, what's some suggestions for how to handle that?
Well, I think one, if she has a big group of kids where she's trying to get them all to sit down, some of them just might not be able to sit down and take in what's being offered. I was at a site recently where there were a couple boys who were they couldn't sit down. And so we gave them the option, do you want to sit in a chair in the back, or do you want to walk along the back of the room while large group's going on? They were able to do that and pay attention. And one of the boys, then when his mom picked him up, then when the large group teacher was asking questions, they were answering everything. And these teachers are going, they never answer anything. And I said, well, it's because we're trying to make them sit down, and they can't sit down. They have to get their wiggles out. Then when the mom came to pick them up, I said, oh, are you Tommy's mom? And immediately she went, because she thought I was going to say something not encouraging, but I was able to encourage her in that moment. So it is hard. I do want to affirm, it's hard with a whole bunch of kids in the room.
Yeah, think about it as if it was like a bullseye, or like you're playing darts. The center of that bullseye is sitting quietly in a chair looking forward, taking in your lesson, but maybe still within a zone of acceptability, still hitting the target is exactly what Kim said. Like, you could sit in a chair, or you could stand in the back, or you can sit in the chair, but you can play with a fidget that I have, or you can sit in the chair, but when you feel uncomfortable, you're welcome to get up and walk along the back wall. Like, giving them choices. So some children, because of their fear brain, they're literally, the idea that the only option they have is to sit down. Even if they like to sit down, they're not going to feel comfortable doing it, because they're not thinking about cause and effect and critical thinking. They're just back here in their fear brain, and defiance is what it's going to manifest as, even though they're actually just afraid.
And Beth brought up fidget balls. Occupational therapists are our best friends as children's ministry people. And a lot of times the occupational therapists in our churches might not want to be with kids on Sunday because they say, I'm with them all week. They are great people to bring in to observe and to give us some ideas on what are some of those things that we can give to kids to help them participate, but also get their wiggles out.
Michaela, hit us with another question.
Yeah. So one of the questions that came up was around a little bit more of the intense responses that some of these kids might have to what's going on. So we had a specific question around what do you do with children that run off, including trying to leave the building? Is it a restraining? They're kicking, they're biting, with some of those more intense reactions, what sorts of, coping or responsive things can we do to help those kids?
If they're a runner, that's what we term them in kids club. We have a runner on the second floor. We get a buddy with them that stays with them so they can be safe, or we make sure that the area is secure, where they can't get out. As far as somebody who is combative and maybe one thing that I learned from occupational therapists is I think so often when they start kicking and we want to restrain them, and actually they might need to get something out physically. So what we need to do is we need to find a safe area for them. So often we'll let that, take that child out in the hall and we'll let them kick and kind of calm themselves down. And we're still there and we're talking to them in a calm voice. And then, then we're able to relate to them. But I will say, I know that it's hard I know a lot of children's ministry people who are watching here are saying, I do not have the people to do that. Sometimes you'll have people in your church who they might not want to go into a room with 40 kids. But if you say, hey, can you be one of our on-call people in the hall? And if we have a child who's having a hard time, will you walk with them? Will you help them go get some water? Hydration is a real thing with kids. If they're dehydrated, it affects their behavior.
And their brain.
And their brain, yes. So those are some ideas.
I think that's great. And again, really helping your volunteers understand that alert stage between calm and fear, and thinking about, like, some things you could do is you can have a calm down box in your room. So this is just a resource we have at Back to Back, the organization I work at. You can just get on our website, backtoback.org/calm down box. And there's a 30-minute video about some little very cheap manipulatives that you can do with Play-Doh and balloons and water bottles and things that maybe would be shiny enough objects they would distract or give the opportunity for a child to begin to self-regulate, so that you can insert into them the kinds of words and experience and felt safety they might need in that moment to calm down. But if they are running, I would, in a moment when they're calm, either after they have run or before they have run, or sometime in the middle of the week, or in some setting other than the acute crisis, saying to the child, what would be the most helpful for you when the music is overwhelming, or when someone says something that's unkind to you, or when you feel like everybody has a chair but you couldn't find one. Like, allowing that child to speak a little bit into their own story will share power and really dignify them.
And parents are great partners for this, because if they're running in children's ministry, they're probably also running at home and at school. So asking them for strategies that help is good.
Absolutely. Okay, next question.
That's great. So one of the questions that came up was related to how you handle when a child becomes dangerous to the other children in the room. It's hurting others or even actively destroying property. What are some suggestions for how leaders should approach that situation?
Safety scripts which we didn't go over today, but that's a great way to do that. Kids Club is a safe place. Beth, I'm not going to let anybody hurt you, so I can't let you hurt this child. Now, again, I empathize with the teams who are saying, I don't have enough people to do that. I just want to encourage you, share success stories with people in your community. Share success stories with your senior pastor on a regular basis. If we go to the people in our community that say, it's a nut house back here, I need more help, it's probably not going to be an effective recruiting strategy. So use those success stories to recruit more people.
And I think also giving a child, so I have a son that was born into a trauma situation, and we didn't get him full-time till he was 12. So he had some very established behavioral problems. And when he has the desire to destroy or destruct or use his energy in a way that is destructive towards something I don't want him to hurt, like something that we consider a value in my home, I just redirect his energy and say, I know that you're feeling right now really frustrated. So, sometimes I use food items, like you can break up these crackers and cookies, or you can go outside, like taking a child into a safe gym or into a place where they can get that emotion they literally don't have words for. They're so angry because they are so afraid. And if all we do is address the anger and not the fear, they're going to just repeat that behavior week in and week out. So really, anything that you can do to help them calm down enough so you can address their fear, and they can, and you can try to be a little detective and think, like, what is it about this room? What is it about this teacher's voice? What is it about this particular point in our hour together? What is it about? Like, what is it that tends to get him over the edge, and then, or her over the edge? And then thinking about really specifically, what plan can we put in place so that when we see that coming up, we can redirect them and give them a choice, so that they don't end up hurting things that are considered of value to you.
Amazing suggestions.
Kind of along those lines, we had a question of just, do you guys have any recommendations as far as restraint goes, like where those lines happen and things like that? Are there any recommendations you can give?
I mean, we only physically restrain if they are going to hurt themselves or hurt others. We try, as we said earlier, we try to move them to a place where they can get out whatever energy they need. Because typically, if you restrain, then that makes them even more afraid. They feel totally out of control, which doesn't then help calm them. But if you can put them in a quiet place, let them kick, and just talk to them calmly, no matter how energetic a kid is, there's a limit to how long they can kick and claw, and they will stop. But obviously, if they're hurting someone else or going to hurt themselves,
And just rewrite the script in your mind that says, like, maybe they're throwing a fit and it started out to be about goldfish or whatever, and you weren't ready to give out the snack yet for whatever reason, or they wanted more snack than you were willing to give, and that precipitated then this big eruption. Sometimes as adults we think, well, if I give him the goldfish he wanted, then he won and I've lost. But really, anytime a child returns back to their calm brain, it's a win for everyone. And then in that calm state, you have a chance to, do whatever instruction or encouragement or correction or whatever you want to do on top of the connection you've just made. Like, nobody wins by punishing them in that way. Like, that's maybe a traditional way of discipline. I was going to start out our time by saying, like, all the traditional ways that we typically discipline kids, like physical discipline, verbal consequences, isolation, they don't work for kids from hurt places. They really will best respond when they feel safe and they have the opportunity to ask again for a double snack, when they get to share power, have a voice, have trust built, when you get to say yes. In those moments, in those acute crisis moments, when someone is having a fit, I literally look for a way to get them to say yes. So I'm looking for something that I can offer to them that will make them say yes, because all they want to say right now is no. No to you, no to this, no to that, no. And that no ends up becoming physical because they don't know how to say what they don't like. So think about, like, would you like a glass of water? Would you like to leave the room with me? Would you like to read first? Would you like, even if you need to talk to your mom, would you like look for something that you think they want so that they can begin to go, the answer to that question is yes. Then you've got a yes, then you can offer a yes. Then all of a sudden the yeses start happening. Connection is built, and then you can begin to do whatever you need to on top of that. But again, rewrite that script that says, I'm not going to give in and give them what they want. That's an ineffective way to deal with kids from trauma.
You know what? And I'm replaying in my head. I think that was great, Beth.
Okay, thanks.
When we talked about connect before you correct, I got distracted and I left out the first part of the story with the little boy who basically cussed me out in the hall. The first thing I said to him was, you seem really frustrated that I keep talking to you. And then I went into the correction as far as, hey, and that hurts my feeling. Can you say it into a nicer way? So it's amazing. Even like kids who are destroying things, rather than go right up to them and say, what are you doing kicking your hand in the wall? If we go up and say, Beth, you seem really angry. What's going on with you? That helps them know all of a sudden we're connected because I've identified. Beth goes, oh, like she gets me. She knows I'm angry. And then they're going to be much more likely to talk to you. So just like that little boy, I identified that he was really done with me talking, which then opened up the door for him to talk to me more.
Yeah, and think about questions that you can ask them that have simple answers. So not like, so what's really the root of this behavior? Help me understand what's triggering you. That's probably too complex of a thought for them to have while they're back there in their fear brain. You want to ask them questions that have short, easy answers that will begin to calm them down. Like you seem upset right now. The answer is yes. Mm-hmm. Did you like the story? Yes or no? Which song did you like the best today? whatever their answer is. Like, start to ask them very simple questions that they can then build their understanding. Oh gosh, Michaela and Megan, we really have so much energy to continue to answer your questions.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing. And there are many more questions coming in, but I know that we're getting close on our time here. But I know you guys are so generous in making yourselves available to everybody to answer more questions and provide more resources. So I'm going to put this up here for everyone to take a look at as well.
This is, I'm going to finish with a little story, but while I'm finishing with this little story, this is just a place that Back-to-Back Ministries, we've been working with kids from hurt places for a really long time. We've been developing materials. If you're interested in more information, you can text that Trauma Informed Church, TIC Church, to that number. Someone will get in touch with you, start to give you some information if you want it. If you're interested in a training at your church, that's someone on our staff that manages and facilitates those trainings. Just a place where you can go to. We'll also make sure that Michaela and Megan send out the resource list of some other places and people that we trust who are talking about this subject where you can get more information. I'm just going to finish with this story I learned this summer when I was in Israel. Those of you who I have met at CPC know I love me some Israel stories. So this is the story about a Jewish Polish pediatrician from the World War II time. His name was Janusz Korsek, and he was early on, before the war, using his medical training and the understanding that God had granted him and telling people, hey, kids from trauma backgrounds, especially those that are fatherless, they shouldn't be cared for in institutions. But think about Poland and Eastern Europe during that time frame. The easiest way to take care of hurt kids was to put them in warehouses, these great big orphanages with giant numbers, small adults, large dorm rooms. And he was talking about, hey, this isn't a good idea. We need kids to feel like they're seen and heard, and we need them to have stability, permanency, felt safety, security, all the things we were talking about today, God had revealed to him all those years ago. Finally, he was writing articles. He was a children's book author, but he decided to open his own orphanage, to open his own space, to put to practice some of the things that he had been talking to others about. So he opened the Orphan Society in 1912 is when that opened. And then in 1939, when Poland was occupied, of course, by Hitler and all of that, they had to leave this beautiful facility. You can go online and look at pictures of what it looked like, the Orphan Society. He put kids in these little tiny family units of 8 at a time, and he allowed them to, resolve conflict and build little internal policies and hold each other accountable and give and receive care amongst each other. They were kicked out of the nice part of town where he had set up his community, and instead they were sent into the ghetto in Warsaw, and they lived there for several years throughout the war. And eventually, in 1942, someone knocked on their door and was going to take them to a concentration camp. And when he answered the door, he knew exactly what it is that they were doing. And he asked the officers there who were going to escort them to the concentration camp to give them a minute. And he got all of the children together. There were 200 children and 12 caregivers. And he told them they were going to go on an adventure together and to get dressed in their very best clothes and to bring their favorite toy or their favorite book with them on this journey. They got to the edge of the concentration camp where they would then be admitted. And one of the guys at the front door, one of the guards, recognized Dr. Korsek as the author of his child's favorite book. And he said, Dr. Korsek, you don't have to die today. Like, we all love you and we love who you are. Just help us get these kids into the concentration camp, and one of us will come in and rescue you. Today is not the day that you have to die. And then the last thing that we know that Dr. Korsek said was he answered that officer by saying, you never leave a child in distress. And then he walked into the concentration camp, and that day he was never heard from again. The 200 children, 12 caregivers, and him were put to death. And I loved that story this summer, learning in Israel, because I thought to myself, we are in a really old story. We stand in a long line of people who've been loving kids from hurt places. And that's really echoes in my ears. We cannot leave children in distress. Like, we get to co-labor, co-partner with Jesus in this work of helping aid and encourage and facilitate and come alongside of the healing that God wants to do in their lives. And so every tool, every opportunity, every effort we can make towards facilitating the healing of hurt kids, it should be our privilege to do so. So be encouraged today as you continue to learn, and may this help you think through some of the things you're going to do even as early as this weekend.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You guys, thank you so much for joining us. Just this is important, and we need to keep talking about this. So thank you for giving us framework and for language to talk about this. We're really just grateful. The resource page will be that they talked about. It has a list of books and some training stuff, and that'll all be included in your replay email and stuff. So you guys will have all of that to explore and further learn about this sort of thing. So
Yeah, thank you.
mhm.
The replay will be coming later today, so you'll be able to view this again, and
Yeah.
the resources will be listed there. And we're so thankful for Kim and Beth being so generous, not only with their time today, but also making all of that information available to you. There were many more questions, Kim and Beth, so I'm thankful for the ways that this conversation has stirred up in the community, questions around how we can really create these spaces for kids to come to know and love and serve Jesus and be the ones who do not leave them in distress. So
Yeah, and that's our favorite topic. So we will talk with you about it anytime. And we're both going to be at CPC, or we'll be in Orlando in January at the so we hope to see a lot of you who are commenting on here there.
Yeah, if you're going to be at CPC, I'd love to see in the chat who's going to be joining us there. We're so thankful for leaders like Kim and Beth and so many who just invest in our community for 3 solid days there. It's a beautiful time of connecting with each other and with the Lord and worship, and the prayer experience, Beth, that you're going to be leading us in is just something that I'm anticipating personally. We actually want to give an invitation to those of you who are watching today, whether you're for sure coming to CPC or not. We can't help ourselves. We can't wait. So we are throwing a party next week to celebrate this community and to give you a sneak peek of what's coming in January, and would love for you guys to join us at that party next week. I hear there's going to be some pretty amazing prizes as well.
Lots of giveaways, lots of fun, lots of confetti.
Win some fun stuff. But I just want to also thank the community who is watching today and in the replay. We are so thankful for what you do each week. And we see you. And we believe that you are leading one of the most futuristic strategic ministries in our church today. And the ways that you are investing in the discipleship of kids and families truly matters. And so we are thankful for the opportunity to get to sit with you today, to get to offer up something to you that we pray is helpful and will bring transformation in your lives and in your ministries. We're committed to your flourishing. So if there is anything that we can do to serve you and care for you as you lead kids and families, that is what we're here for. We love you guys, and we're just so thankful for everything that you do. Thankful for Kim and Beth and for the investment that you've made today. Praying blessing over you guys, and we look forward to the next time we get to sit across from each other. All right. Thank you, friends. Have a great day, everyone.
Great day.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.